Hope you're all doing well. I've had a busy week, so busy that I didn't even have time to pre-watch this. So we are going to be raw dogging this reaction.
Give it to us raw and wriggling.
I'm going to probably regret this.
Despite the millions of job openings that are apparently out there, it's harder than ever to get hired. The news is constantly telling us that companies are desperate for workers and that there's tons of jobs just waiting to be filled. Meanwhile, there's stories everywhere of people sending out tens or hundreds of applications without ever getting a single interview. It just doesn't.
So with tech companies and startups, they always want to look like they're growing because it helps them with getting financing. And so there's incentives built in for this type of stuff.
Doesn't make sense. So what really happened to turn finding work into a full-time job? Well, a few decades ago, even when there were job shortages, it was still much easier to get a good job. The advice the boomers give of putting on a tie and asking the manager for a job really worked. All it took was enough tries before you finally met someone who liked you. Today, you could try this thousands of times and you probably still wouldn't get a chance. One difference that's easy.
People don't try it though. Most people do not go and show up at a business. They think that sending 1,000 applications in and doing the same thing that everybody else is doing is going to work. I promise you, if you go on foot and you show up at businesses, especially local businesses, smaller businesses, most businesses are small, local businesses, and you start actually going in, say, hey, are you hiring? Here's my application, and handing it to them. You will have way more success than just sending out emails. This is, again, nothing that people haven't heard.
Easy to notice is that the bar for entry has gotten significantly higher for most jobs. Before 2000, a good college degree was almost a guarantee of a good job. Companies would compete with each other to get the most recent graduates. They were forced to offer a wage that could support a family. If they didn't, they wouldn't get any employees. But now the tables have completely turned, and they're only really interested in the very top % of students. What used to amount to a free entry ticket has become the very minimum of what they expect. Despite over 70% of listed jobs requiring a bachelor's degree, only a bit over 30% of American adults actually have one. But you don't just need a good degree, of course.
Okay, but take into account that 75% or this 75% of jobs that require a degree, remember that a lot of job postings are ghost jobs. They're not real job postings. So it's probably closer to 50% or even less that require a degree.
You also need real-world experience even for so-called entry-level positions. Companies are so picky now that they're asking people who have just left college to have years worth of experience, all for a salary they can barely survive on.
If you see a job that says this requires 3 years experience and you only have 2 years or a year and a half or even a year, you still want to apply. You still want to go in for an interview, and if they ever touch on how long you've been doing this, because the reality is if you check all of the other boxes or a bunch of other boxes, or they like your personality, they may end up hiring you anyways. They're not just going to go down a list and be like, oh, he only has 2 years experience and this required 3, but look at his portfolio. It's better than the person who has 4 years experience. They're going to say, well, of course we're going to hire the person with 2 years experience because they have a better portfolio. Again, it also depends on where you worked, right? Let's say that you worked at Adobe, for instance. That's going to matter a lot more to somebody who's hiring somebody than somebody who just worked at some random, like their own thing, essentially, or some random overseas company or something that nobody's ever heard of. Your application will stand out more if you worked for some larger company and you worked on bigger projects there. They're going to say, whoa, that's impressive. So again, not every year of experience is created equally.
The only way to get this is to work while studying full-time, which is rarely possible if you need to do an internship for the field you plan on entering. The past always looks better in hindsight, of course. There were still job shortages and people still got rejected, but the key difference between then and now is the massive rise in competition because of the internet. If you were a company in the 1980s looking to hire a few new employees, you didn't really have many options. Small companies could only recruit through in-person events, word of mouth, or physical leaflets posted to boards. It was a slow, long process with only a few applicants to choose from. Hiring managers had to treat each applicant like a real person, using their own judgment to figure out who would be the best fit. Large companies only had a few more tools at their disposal. With their size, they could get a foot in the door at colleges or high schools and hoover up applications that way. But even then, they were still much more limited. So just think.
Well, and keep in mind back then also, a college degree was a lot more valuable because there weren't as many people with college degrees and they were just more rigorous. Colleges nowadays are not necessarily meant for training and skill building. The college goal now, colleges' goals, because they are money-making institutions, their goals is to increase their bottom line and their profits.
Think about how much this process has changed in such a short time. If any company wants a new employee, all they need to do is put a listing out on one of the many websites for that explicit purpose, and it'll almost immediately be seen by thousands and thousands of people, along with a whole way.
Yeah, so it's a good problem and a bad problem, because now you have to have entire hiring HR individuals that have to go through and sift through all of these applications
Of different recruiters who will spread it even more. Without any barriers to applying like showing up in person, these jobs can get thousands of applicants. There's no reason not to try your luck, so why not send off 50 applications? As it's gotten harder and people need to send even more applications to get a chance, it's only gotten worse.
If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please go ahead and do that, and like the video if you're liking this video, and let's continue. These flies.
It's exactly the same thing that's happened to dating. Modern technology has globalized the potential pool of competition. Finding a job or a partner used to be so much more personal. It all hinged on the impression you gave to the person across from you. Now it's a total numbers game. How you fill out your application form or your Tinder profile has much more of an impact than pretty much anything else. And as a result, the standards have also gone up by ludicrous amounts on both job sites and dating sites. It makes people and companies think they have far higher standards because they have so much more choice. The reality on the ground though hasn't really changed, and the effects
I was already married by the time dating apps became pretty ubiquitous. And I remember when I was in boot camp at doing software development, my best friend and I went to this school together, and there was this two younger gentlemen that were in our group, and we were doing a group project to create an app. And these two, it's so funny, but these two were obsessed with creating an app, like a dating app. And my friend and I, who wanted to create a messaging and finance app, we're both married and had kids, and we were super confused at why would you want to create a dating app? We were just so bored by it. And I think we ended up going to different groups, but I just remember us fighting and butting heads over who just thought dating apps were kind of just silly and dumb.
This has had on the job market have been catastrophic. It's led to the whole process getting much more dehumanizing for applicants, who have been turned into numbers on a spreadsheet. So those are the biggest reasons why finding a job used to be much easier than it is today. But the real devil is in the details. Even with all of these changes, finding work really shouldn't take hours of searching and hundreds of applications. The reason it's all so frustrating are the things that companies have done to deal with this new reality. So let's explore the different ways they found to make getting hired even harder. Today, the problem for companies has been completely reversed. Instead of not getting good enough applications to choose from, they get hundreds or thousands more than they need. Every time they need to hire someone new, it means reading through hundreds of applications and filtering out all the ones that aren't suited. In a perfect world, companies would put more time and effort into this, but we all know that hasn't really happened. Instead, they've turned to one of the most frustrating and dehumanizing parts of the modern job market: automatic rejection systems. Today, over 97% of Fortune 500 companies use what's referred to as an ATS, an applicant tracking system. The basic idea is simple. An ATS works like a sieve, filtering out any applications that don't meet whatever requirements the employer has set. When they first came into widespread use in the early 2000s with the rise of the internet, they could only deal with a few basic questions. If someone ticks the box saying they're not legally allowed to work, for example, they'd get rejected. Today, ATS companies advertise their services to.
So this filtering process, you can again bypass a lot of times by just going into the business and handing your application to somebody in charge. Ideally, if the owner of the company is there, try and get in contact with them, and then you can chat with them. One way I was able to talk to architects back in the day was I would pitch that I was writing an online article. And I did end up writing online articles for these architects. But by doing that, I was able to meet with dozens of architects. So here's the kicker. I'm interviewing the architect, the owner of the firm. And so I would just pitch my drafting services to them. A lot of you know that I teach 3D modeling on this channel back in the day, like a decade or more ago. And since I'm already sitting down with the architect of the firm, I'd say, hey, by the way, I do 3D rendering and modeling for architects. If you're interested, I'd give them my card. I got all my clients that way. It's getting in, it's finding what is it? Vulnerabilities But yeah, this is how you can hack and get more jobs, is finding creative ways to meet with the people who are in charge.
To the public like this is still the only thing they do. Companies like Greenhouse, Lever, or Workday have to admit their products automatically reject people. It's far too obvious for them to deny it, but they try to give the impression that it's only a few legal questions that do this. Of course, this isn't the case at all. Rejection questions, where giving the wrong answer puts your CV in the reject pile, are everywhere today. In fact, they're only the first hurdle an applicant needs to get past to beat the machine. As the internet becomes the main place to search for jobs, ATS companies had to adapt. They needed to keep up with the increasing amounts of applications, so they added more rejection questions. Instead of just filtering out the people you legally can't hire, they started giving companies the option to reject people based on whatever legal criteria they wanted. Your address, your experience, any question they ask can make the difference between getting an interview or getting ghosted. Normally, they don't outright reject CVs, of course, they just rank them all based on the criteria they're using. Technically, all an ATS really does is turn tons of applications into a ranked list of candidates. If you end up on the bottom of the pile though, or anywhere near except the very top, you'll never get looked at anyway. An ATS probably won't automatically reject you, it will just put you so far back in the queue that you might as well not even be there. But even this approach still left too many applications for companies to look through. To fix it, they made the ATS able to read the CV itself. Today, these systems can go through applications and pick out certain keywords they want to see. If you didn't use those certain words they wanted, you'll end up at the back of the queue and eventually get rejected. They can also read how much experience you have in certain areas, making note of everyone who doesn't make the cut. Even today, these systems are far from perfect. If you don't have the same keywords they use in the job posting, then your CV can often end up on the bottom of the pile regardless of whether you're qualified or not. Similar problems can come from how you format your CV. Some templates don't get read as well by the system, meaning they miss out important parts and unfairly reject people. There are ways to avoid this, like making sure you use the same words they use in the advert, or using a standard template that the system will be designed to read. At the end of the day though, it's not something that people should have to do. Rewriting your entire CV every time is part of what makes finding a job in the modern world so soul-crushing, especially when you just get ghosted over and over again. Pretty much every single company in the West uses these systems now, but even with almost 100% adoption, the situation could still get worse. AI is perfectly suited for use in an ATS. It's already widespread, and it makes these programs far better at understanding people's CVs and filtering people out. So companies will be eager to cut out just a little bit more of the human element from finding new employees, as they might just save a little bit extra on personnel costs. This is the crux of the problem with ATS and how they've taken over the entire process. Finding a job used to be a human experience, where you were in at least limited control of the situation. Obviously you couldn't make it a certainty that you get hired, but you at least got a chance to make a unique impression on whoever did decide. By turning all of the applicants into a set of data, companies dehumanize the entire thing. So out of the thousands of applicants,
yeah, man, screw that. I mean, I know there's like this employee-employer kind of, antagonistic relationship. But the fact of the matter is, most businesses are filled with people who are humans and like to have human relationships. Not everybody has that experience, and maybe that's why you're unemployed.
They usually are for each good job, you have to stand out in spite of a system intentionally turning you into a data point on a spreadsheet. But even this incredibly infuriating roll of the dice is still the best outcome you can have when applying to one of these jobs. People talk about the 1,000-to-1 odds of getting a job once it's posted, and they might think they're over-exaggerating. In reality though, the odds are even worse. A large part of the rejections people get are because the jobs they're applying to don't actually exist. It's a problem that's only been getting worse. The ratio of people getting hired to job openings in the US actually fell below 0.5 in
So something that I don't think I've ever heard anybody really talk about on any of these kind of videos. I've heard ghost jobs, I've heard about that a lot, but what I haven't, what would be a good term for the opposite of a ghost job? Basically a job that exists or could exist, but there's no listing for it. There's lots of companies out there that just don't get around to listing that they have job openings. So let me think of an example, especially when it comes to like any potential sales jobs. Let's say that there's a secretary that works in an office. She's constantly dealing with on-site issues and people coming in. And so the phones they ring off the hook all the time. And if you were to come in and say, hey, are you guys hiring? And they say, well, are we hiring? Maybe actually, because maybe we do need another person in here and to help take calls and deal with all, because it seems like Micah has just been running around like a chicken with the head cut off. And if we had a second one, if we had two, then we could probably get a lot more done. We could probably increase our bottom line. And then you go into another company and you say, hey, are you hiring any landscapers? And I say, well, we did have a commercial client that wanted to give us more properties. And if we had another guy and another truck, yeah, we could, yeah, actually, I think call him back. Let's get him in here. Those are just two minor examples, but those types of things exist in so many companies and owners. Like if you work at a cabinetry shop, let's say that you're expanding your cabinet shop and you're in the middle of building the expansion, but it's not going to be ready for a month from now, right? But you don't have your listings up for new hires yet because the cabinet shop's not done yet. Well, you had somebody come in and say, hey, are you guys hiring? Not right now, but we're going to be hiring in a month, actually, because we're going to need more people to man the more machines that we now have. So they're the opposite of ghost jobs. They're like pre-born jobs. I don't know. Somebody in the comments think of a better word for this. Think of a better term, please.
In 2023, which means at least half of all job openings are for so-called ghost jobs, which are never going to get anyone hired in the first place. So let's explore the insidious reason companies keep these listings up and why so many people's time is wasted by them. Ghost jobs are everywhere on sites like Indeed. You can apply to a job listing and wait anxiously for a response, but after weeks or months you either get rejected or you don't hear back at all. In a lot of these cases, it probably has nothing to do with you or your CV. Instead, it was all probably because the company wasn't planning on hiring anyone anyway. In a survey of over 1,000 hiring managers, over 2/3 admitted to leaving their job postings up for a month. 10% had left listings on the internet for over 6 months without filling the role. There's a ton of different reasons that companies do this today, none of which are a good excuse for the time they waste. Sometimes people already know who's actually going to get the job. Some executives might need something to do, or maybe they've already decided on an internal candidate. Maybe they're just going to dump the workload on one of their current employees but need to make it look like they tried to find someone else. It barely takes them any time or resources at all to drop some templated job listing online, and the longer they leave it up, the higher the chance that they'll hook that magical unicorn employee that they've been looking for. The person who's qualified and experienced but will probably work for under market rate and won't ask for any benefits. Other times these listings will just be there for appearances. It looks good for the company if they're growing and hiring new people, for example. They might also think that the current employees will wonder who's getting replaced and work harder to avoid it. There's a million sleazy reasons for companies to create fake listings. The job sites will be happy to take their business, and that's another reason it's such a massive problem today. The job boards actively want dead listings. Fake listings boost their numbers and let them brag about the thousands of jobs they have available, given this illusion of plenty even when there's only scraps.
Well, the job hiring board companies have no incentive to tell them to pull these down if they're not real because they're making money off of the listings
on the table. These websites aren't there to cater to job seekers. They only need to do the bare minimum to stay functional. If you're not paying for it, then you're the product, not the customer. Job seekers on these sites don't have any agency. For most, it's a choice between using them or going hungry. The real customers are the companies who post the adverts and pay for the extras. If they want to post dead listings, why would Indeed or any other job board stop them? All of these things have made finding a job that much harder. Today, it's an excruciating trial of patience unless you get unusually lucky early on in your search. Of course, if there is a problem, even one that's been entirely fabricated, an industry will spring up to solve it. Middlemen and recruitment agencies used to be necessary parts of the professional world. If you couldn't get your job seen by the right people, they could bridge the gap and find good candidates for the opening. You would think that this instant communication and the ability to have your job opening seen by thousands of people in seconds would have damaged this industry, but instead the recruitment industry has grown massively in the past few decades. In the UK, the recruitment industry grew to be worth over 140 billion at the end of 2022, 20 billion more than just 3 years before that. 30,000 recruitment companies now employ over 200,000 people. For a considerable sum, they'll eventually find you a job, if they don't just string you along for more payments. Even in the best of cases, all these agencies do is reverse the changes of the past 20 years and give you a real shot at a job opening. Most of the time though, they're only really solving a problem that the wider industry created for people in the first place. It's a whole lot of money which only keeps flowing in because of how hard it is for regular people to do it themselves now. So maybe you got lucky with automated systems, or perhaps you went through the hassle of dealing with recruiters. But either way, you've somehow got yourself an interview. Even that crucial stage of the process has been changed beyond recognition. While there may be a short, often meaningless interview towards the end of the process, tons of companies have substituted that for questionnaires and tests instead. While the questions might vary, most of these kinds of tests are pretty similar. Some of them might ask you about what you would do in an imaginary situation, supposedly to test your critical thinking.
And the right answer would probably get you fired if you actually did it.
Others ask the kinds of questions where you can either lie and give the obviously correct answer, or be honest and get marked down. All of them though are a complete waste of time. It hasn't stopped anyone from Microsoft to Walmart, all of these companies using them to sort through potential employees. In fact, big retail chains are some of the most infamous companies for just giving people these.
You know what though? I think there's just a lot of really stupid people out there and they have to sift through them. They almost have no choice. It's like, maybe 10% of people are just absolutely stupid and dumb. And they're really the only way to figure out who's who, that you're not part of that 10%, is to have these assessment tests. Because, yeah, I see no point in a lot of these assessment tests. Some of them are just, maybe it's mostly even just testing your ability to read. But the thing is it's a really quick way to get rid of that 10% that are dummies.
Tests instead of ever actually interviewing them. Why they need to know your star sign to see if you can stack shelves fast enough is another matter entirely, but the reason Walmart is the most enthusiastic about these tests above all other companies will become clear soon enough. These tests don't come close to giving employers information on the skills and experience that candidates might have either. Most people
the personality tests in general, it's like, it really depends on what it is that you're doing. Yeah, I never quite understood the personality tests. I think people are different when they're dealing with different people. My personality is completely different when I'm with my family. It's completely different when I'm with just my brothers. It's completely different when I'm with my friends. Personalities change depending on the environment. My personality is different when I'm at home. Personality is different when I'm at church. I don't go to church, but when I did, it was. And my personality is different when I go to work. So personality tests, really, what do they, come with me to the bar and figure out what kind of personality I have. Let's see if it's different from what I fill in.
Rashly just try to figure out what answers they want you to pick. The integral question of whether you'd be a good fit, on which the entire process should depend on, has almost been completely forgotten. Today, even references are nearly always just a confirmation that you worked at a company for a certain amount of time. Any information on whether you were actually a good employee can't be given anymore because you can sue people who give you bad references. It means that companies just don't make themselves liable. So if they don't actually measure your aptitude, what's the point of all these aptitude tests? A lot of the time, the actual content of the questions doesn't matter. The main thing they're testing people on is how eager they are to jump through the hoops in the first place. If you can see through the corporate language and spend the time figuring out what they want you to say, you're already conforming. It's also why there are often multiple different tests at different stages in the hiring process. The more of their hoops you'll jump through, the more likely you are to be a good corporate drone. Walmart's tests have the same purpose as the humiliating dances they make their employees do. They break people down just a little bit more. Another reason for these tests has nothing to do with the candidates at all. Instead, they're in place because the upper management has no faith in the people further down the pyramid to choose good employees. Once companies start hiring by questioning,
well, I also think it's a liability. They're also searching for potential liability issues with hiring a certain individual. Is this person going to get us sued? Is this person going to sue us once we fire them? So in that regard, it's totally understandable. Unfortunately, there are bad actors out there who will go and get a job somewhere just so that they can get fired or injured and collect on unlawful firing. There are so many bad actors out there that you really, unfortunately, have to play these games to avoid those situations. You really do. And I will be the only business owner who will talk about this and tell you this because it's kind of an insider's secret.
They can take middle management out of the loop entirely. It means they can put even more of their faith and trust into data and spreadsheets over real human judgment. With all of the changes we've seen in hiring in the past 2 decades, a common theme has emerged. All of these changes take the power out of the hands of the applicant and put them into the hands of corporate management. The process of getting your applications noticed is an exhausting numbers game. Either getting lucky or sending off dozens or hundreds of applications is the only way people can actually survive.
I looked at the data. If you just applied to a job through a job board, the odds of you getting hired were about 3%. So you got to apply to a lot of different jobs in order to have a chance to get them, and you're going to get lots and lots of just no responses.
Even if you do get through the first stage, employers will happily waste months of your time. They'll put you through endless different stages of interviews, tests, and trial periods, all to just ghost you after they choose somebody else. It's a truly dystopian part of our modern society that all of these barriers have been put in the way of people simply surviving. And the reward at the end of this arduous journey is just usually a job that pays the same wage as it did 20 years ago, before all of this even happened. In today's economic climate, it's a question of survival. Every paycheck can make or break someone's entire life. These artificial delays have done serious damage to society and eroded what little trust there was between employers and employees. So you can play nice to try and dupe the system, but never really buy into any of the rhetoric about family or trust.
Your business, your company is your company. Your coworkers are your coworkers. Your staff are your staff. They're not your family. I think when businesses do this and call you family, it devalues and waters down what a family actually is. And it is so insulting. We're like family here. Okay, well, what kind of family did you grow up in? Some families are dysfunctional. Some families are great, but still, like, it's so gross when companies try and say that you're a family. It's like, family is vastly more important than business, vastly more important than your company. If an employer ever tries to consider you family, I would try and push back. Really. You're not my family. I come here and work for my family.
Trust. Don't fool yourself into thinking these companies actually care about you or an equal system or any other garbage. It's a myth that everybody's hiring, as it's been shown repeatedly that there's much more to this equation that first meets the eye.
All right, everybody. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.